Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of Food School Smarter, Stronger, Leaner podcast. Today is Saturday, guys, and we are still on. And we are still in Helsinki at a biohacking conference that we talked about on the last podcast. So actually yesterday was pretty exciting day. I went to the conference, I volunteered there, but also I met a lot of amazing people who are moving our health and self-care science to the next level, to the future frontier, helping us with tech, with supplements, with different practices like breathing or certain movement, certain meditations, help us to take better care of ourselves and become better human beings. Every single day. So this is happening in Helsinki, and today you're gonna hear our amazing and fascinating conversation with food advocate, food journalist, food blogger, but also chef, also a scientist, also an author, Anthony Werner, who I actually met at Future of Food conference that was done in Valencia, in Spain. It was organized by EIT Food. It's probably the biggest organization in Europe that is working on improving, on changing our food system and policies around that, and also entrepreneurship and everything and anything in between. Anyhow, Anthony is a very passionate writer, and let me read to you something from Anthony's blog to give you a better idea why Anthony does what he does. So much food pseudoscience is unfortunately so entwined in our knowledge that for many people it is hard to separate. The majority of people buying gluten-free products have no allergy to gluten. They do so because they believe they are buying a healthier option. Food scientist friends of mine who should know better tell me they're going on a juice diet to detox their body after Christmas. I know medical professionals who swear the echinacea can cure colds. I was talking to a well-known food blogger recently who said anything homemade is better for you than any processed food you can buy. The world of food is full of misleading information. I do not have all the right answers, but I do have a critical eye and a mind trained in scientific investigation. When I hear people telling lies about food, it makes me angry, and that anger gives me the energy to challenge and fight. Never mess with an angry chef. By the way, Andy is not that angry at all, and you'll find out he's a pretty amazing, nice, and optimistic guy who's just passionate about telling the truth about food to the best of his ability, and also help you to see that truth. You know, a lot of people, a lot of my clients, a lot of friends, because I'm a nutrition coach, ask me, so is this food is healthy? So different foods, right? And except for, some really obvious examples of junk food full of highly processed sugars and fats and additives and all that, almost all whole foods, they're good for you as a part of a balanced, healthy diet. So a lot of times I would say to my clients, I would give that example. Take an apple. Of course, it can be a part of a totally healthy, balanced diet, but let's face it, you cannot survive on apples. And so if you eat just apples, your diet is not healthy, no matter how healthy, quote unquote, apple is. And my passion specifically is to help to design through different initiatives a food system that actually help you to eat a balanced diet from variety of foods, local and seasonal and fresh and affordable and available to you. It's a big vision that is not going to be done in a day, of course, but that's the purpose. You cannot survive on any particular food. There are no superfoods that can be eaten in isolation and giving you the best nutrition you can possibly have. You need to eat variety of foods. You need to have a balanced diet, and that balanced diet will be different for different people in the world. And So this is what I'm passionate about, and Anthony is very passionate about very similar things. He's been writing a lot. He has books that you can find in the show notes, the links to those books, published about foods and diets and how we are confused in the world of foods and diets, and how we can actually see the truth, and how we can eat better and be better food consumers, be more educated food consumers. So Anthony writes a lot about that, and now he's transitioning to a different world. He's more passionate now, and he's writing a book about it, food system, and how to design food system that helps us to eat better without all these food myths and confusions and all these diets, but also food system that supports our well-being on a planetary level, avoiding food waste, or avoiding practices that create negative effects, like more global warming, or more pollution, or more hunger in certain areas of our world. So this is what Anthony is passionate about right now, and we will be talking about that on the podcast too. But also we are talking about why people gravitate to diets. Why do we feel like we need to be on a diet? What are the reasons behind that? And Anthony also gives some advice about how to eat healthier today, you personally, and on a more global level. So this conversation is very fascinating, interesting. It makes you think differently. It makes you a better scientist and a better eater. And without further ado, guys, let's just tune into this fascinating conversation, and I promise you're gonna have fun listening to it. First, I would like to give a little bit of an introduction. So Anthony Warner, professional chef, author, known on the web as an angry chef, who's done a lot of work to help people to look at food more scientifically, and I think with more common sense, and to help. I think, Anthony, you helped a lot of people to kind of deconfuse themselves about different diets and all these diet fads, and demonizing one food over another. So I really love your blog, and all the work that you do. I definitely have a lot to learn from you, and love reading your blog. So tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself. Like, what do you believe is important? What's your mission in life? What you would like to change in this world?
Yeah, okay, that's fine. I'd apologise up front, because I'm not always as angry perhaps as people might think I might be from the blog and the books. That I do write in a character, although lots of things do irritate me. I'm not one for shouting and screaming on podcasts, so I apologise if that's what people are expecting. So yeah, I'm a chef. I am a chef. I do have a background in science, which is perhaps where a lot of my writing and my ideas for what I'm going to write about comes from. But I am a chef. I worked for 10 years in restaurants and hotels. Some quite nice restaurants, and was head chef of a number of pretty good places. And then I worked for another 10 years in the food industry. Working on manufactured food products for sale in supermarkets, that sort of thing. I guess when you are a chef, when you dedicate your life to cooking food and making nice food, you only do that because you love food. I could have done a number of different things. I had a science degree from university, and I could have gone into lots of different areas, but I just was sort of drawn by a love of food, and that's that's something that is at the heart of everything I do. And I want people to enjoy food. I want people to, it's one thing we all have to do several times every day, and I think life is much better when you enjoy that. And I just sort of noticed a few years ago that there was a lot of stuff going on, especially on social media. People being made to feel guilty about how they eat, or being told they're eating in the wrong way somehow, or being told that they're doing this really important part of life wrong, and sort of also just people seemingly stripping the pleasure out of eating, and creating a world where people couldn't really relax around food, which food is very important, especially sort of socially and how we interact with one another, and it's a thing that brings us all together, or should bring us all together at its best. And people are kind of making people feel guilty and putting sort of shame and guilt into the world of food. And I wanted to drill into that and really understand it, and also just help people counter that, because I feel that's an extremely negative thing when that starts happening. And that's kind of where the blog was born. And what you find is all this sort of pretty much every instance of people making others feel guilty about food and ashamed about what they're eating and being told they're eating the wrong way. The science underlying that really doesn't stack up in almost every single case. So, I sort of revealed that, and I revealed how a lot of the people selling that sort of narrative are basically playing, not playing tricks. They're not intentionally playing tricks, but they're getting a lot of stuff wrong and misleading people.
And what are some of the, most common misleading thoughts or like statements people do online, like maybe bloggers or Instagrammers or influencers or chefs, and what maybe makes you the most angry?
Okay. I think the question that what makes me the most angry would be something which is incredibly common, actually, far more common than I would like it to be, which is people who make claims about serious diseases, about cancer, about various different health conditions, even making claims that certain diets can treat those conditions, and without any good evidence underlying that. And that's very common. One of the most common diets that does this is this idea of the alkaline diet. This idea that certain foods can acidify and alkalize your body in some way, and that's incredibly common. It's completely, it's based on no good evidence at all. It's actually the principles underlying it are completely ridiculous from a sort of physiological point of view, from a food point of view, from basic biology, from biochemistry. There's no truth underlying the alkaline diet, and people, but you will see it. It's incredibly common. A lot of celebrities follow it and talk about it. A lot of online influencers talk about foods acidifying or alkalizing your body and the health impact of that, and it's just complete pseudo-scientific garbage. There's no truth underlying it at all, but it's very, very persistent. And that's one which, in its most extreme forms, people say can cure cancer, and people are persuaded to abandon conventional treatments in order to go on this basically pseudo-scientific diet. People being arrested in America. The founder of the diet has been put in jail for practicing medicine without a license. But still, it's just remarkably persistent. It just sort of carries on, and however much it's sort of debunked by people like me and many others, it still keeps on resurfacing, and that's pretty frustrating. But it's also quite interesting. I'm interested in why that happens. I'm interested in what the appeal of these things are. What the appeal of that stuff is, and that's a lot of my writing is investigating the reasons why we are so drawn to this stuff, because we can debunk it all we want, and if it keeps on coming back, there has to be a reason why that's appealing. And I think we can learn a lot from why that is appealing and why people are inclined to believe it.
What do you find the the most common reason why you personally think people tend to gravitate to those diets, a lot of which are extreme?
I think the reasons are quite complex. I think one of the main ones is this. Food science, or nutrition and diet, they are essentially a very, very complex and uncertain science. It's actually very difficult to study nutrition. It's very difficult to do hard science on the long-term effects of a particular diet in humans, because how do you actually do that sort of experiment? You can't do a proper randomized controlled trial when it comes to long-term dietary patterns, because you can't force an intervention on someone. You can't persuade. You have to basically do observational studies where you look at what people are eating and look at health effects. And there's all sorts of problems with doing that. There's all sorts of confounding factors. There's all sorts of, so for instance, someone, if you're saying, looking at people and saying that someone who eats, loads of, if you find an association between someone eating loads of potatoes and someone not being particularly healthy, you might then conclude that potatoes are bad for you. But in reality, there's going to be a lot of confounding factors. So a lot of those potatoes that they eat might be eaten as fries or a burger and a milkshake, but also a lot of potatoes might be eaten by people on lower incomes, and that has an impact of health. A lot of potatoes might be eaten by people who are inclined to do other unhealthy things like smoking or not exercising, and that might have an effect. So it might not be the potatoes that have an effect. And as you can't do a long-term randomized controlled trial on forcing people to eat potatoes, and you can't have a placebo for potatoes, it's very difficult to actually do really, really hard science and work out the actual facts behind what the impact of particular foods is on long-term health. So there's a lot of complexity and there's a lot of uncertainty. And if you understand about nutrition science, you accept that there is that complexity and that uncertainty. So that's something is intrinsic to the study of the science. There's no way around it. You can't keep people in laboratories for their entire lives and feed them a specific diet. And even if you could, that would confound the results because they probably wouldn't enjoy it very much. So the problem with that is that when you ask someone to give you some dietary advice based on good quality evidence, that advice is going to be a little bit vague, it's going to be a little bit uncertain, there's going to be a lot of complexity and nuance around it, and there'll be a lot of people will sort of be saying, yes, but you can do this, but they're putting, and so there'll be a lot of uncertainty. And our brains don't like uncertainty. We are humans are storytelling creatures, and we want there to be sort of a clear cause and a clear effect, and that's what the sort of stories that we're inclined to believe. So we don't like the uncertainty. It's basically part of our way of navigating the world is to want things to be simple and want things to be straightforward. So we are not inclined to believe the sort of evidence-based nutrition advice. We're inclined to believe the people who present life as a simple thing and say, well, actually the problem is that sugar is toxic, or the problem is gluten is the devil, or the problem is that food's acidifying your body or alkalizing your body, and you need to cut out all this and you need to eat all this. And people offering really, really strict rules are often the ones we are really, really inclined to believe, even if sometimes we even kind of know that those people are selling us a bit of a lie, but we're just inclined to believe it. We want simple ways of navigating the world. We want simple rules to go about life. And when the evidence-based science can't provide us with that, then we're drawn to the people who do provide us with that, even though those people are not constrained by the truth. They're just trying to sell you something, and so that's really probably one of the biggest traps we fall into. We want simplicity in a complex world, and sometimes the genuine evidence-based science can't provide that simplicity, so we fall into the arms of people who can.
Yeah, I agree. From my personal practice as a nutrition coach, I find that a lot of people gravitate towards certain dietary theory because they just don't want to get into all this complexity. They want simple answers, simple rules, so they can make decisions really fast and at the same time kind of preserve their health and energy for other things they want to do in life.
Yeah, and I just feel like that. That's fine. I understand that we all do it in certain areas of our life. I buy a shiny branded Apple laptop because that's my simple rule for navigating it, because I think that's fine. My friends who know more about IT than me say I'm overpaying for that laptop, but I want a simple rule because I don't really understand computers. So we all use those rules, and that's fine. We all have simple ways of navigating the world. We all have brands we buy, and we all have ways we have of simplifying things. The problem with a lot of the diet stuff is that those simple rules tend to push people towards pretty restrictive diets, because they're a simple rule, and often it's don't eat this, do eat this, or people just end up with often slightly disordered dietary patterns. It's often a gateway to even more disordered dietary patterns, and cutting loads of stuff out and not eating loads of stuff, and that can become problematic. And it's also, generally speaking, if you're involved in a diet which cuts a lot of stuff out and tells you can't eat this, you can't eat that, generally that's not going to be sustainable long term, because that's just another thing about humans. If you say to someone you can never eat this, that's all they're going to think about. If you create this hard and fast rule, you can never eat any sugar, you're probably going to be thinking, God, I miss sugar. But whereas if you have it now and again, and you don't obsess about it, you're probably more likely to enter into a more sensible dietary pattern. So it just pushes people to extreme positions, and those positions are just not sustainable and often not healthy.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I probably started eating the healthiest that I've been eating ever in my life when I allowed myself to have anything, anytime I want.
Mm-hmm.
And that freedom kind of made me want to eat better every single day, because I know, there is always chocolate and cookies whenever I want them. So it's just my choice whether I want or not to eat them today.
Yeah. It's like the old adage. If you tell people not to think about a white elephant, then the first thing they're going to think about is a white elephant. That's all you can now think about. Whereas if you have a more relaxed attitude to food, it won't work for everybody. Saying, "Oh, just eat whatever you want, whenever you want it," because some people have other things that they're dealing with. But really restrictive diets they're just never sustainable.
Yeah, I agree. And you did all this deep research into dietary world, and probably some things good that you learned. So maybe something that improved your eating habits, or changed the way you look at things, at food. Like, what are the things that you learned doing all this research of diets and different?
I think the interesting. Well, there's a couple of interesting things, but the interesting thing for me, probably the most interesting thing for me, is how, in terms of good quality information that we need to know about healthy eating. Often people say people just don't understand enough about what healthy eating is, and I think that's probably partly the case because there's so much information out there. Well, the reality is there's so good information about how to improve your diet is kind of summarized by eat more fruits and vegetables, because most of us don't eat enough. Fiber's pretty good. Don't limit. Well, basically, I'd just say eat more fruit and vegetables, eat more fiber, whole grain carbohydrates, maybe some oily fish if you eat fish. And I don't think there's much more in terms of really good quality, healthy eating information that you can really give out. So there's not that much people need to know. It's just people aren't doing that for various very complex reasons. But one of the things in terms of what is good for your health that surprised me so much is the really important impact of our social connectivity. And I consider that to be, in terms of any sort of lifestyle thing that people talk about. We obsess about food, and we obsess. We could probably all do exercising a bit more, but people get obsessed about exercise. And think about all the various different lifestyle things that we're doing, but we really underestimate the importance of our social connectivity and our connections with people, and our sort of the things that give us real sort of meaning and purpose in our life, and how important the impact of them are on our actual physical health. People with more socially connected live longer and are healthier, but by enormous measures. And it's something we don't really think about as important. It's also something which is, in my view, the really most important, one of the most important roles of food in our life is that sort of helping with that social connectivity and helping bring people together. And if you look at the healthiest populations on Earth, people who are sort of long-lived and live long, healthy lives, then there's radically different dietary patterns within all those people. There's various blue zones around the world, and they don't eat the same. But what they do is they all use food very sort of socially, and they all have sort of good connections with society, and they all have a lot of meaning and value in their lives, and a lot of that is connected to their food culture. So that's the surprising thing that I learned certainly when I was researching for my last book, is how vital those things are and how much we underestimate those things are. So when people go on a massively restrictive diet and say, I can't eat this and I can't eat that, and they will often exclude themselves from social situations, they will often exclude themselves from family situations or make those situations difficult or hard to manage, and I think we really underestimate the importance of that in our health.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and yeah, I so agree with you on the point that food helps us to connect with each other on a global level, even because food really unites all of us. It's this system that we all have in common.
Yeah, and it's also part of our identity, and it's part of our history, and it's part of it's very much how we eat. It's very much part of who we are, and sharing the food that we love is the way we show sort of love to people that we care about, and it is incredibly important, and you really need to. I think people really need to make sure that what they're doing with their own personal diet doesn't exclude themselves completely with that. I was at an event recently. Future of food type event, and someone was trying to sort of sell me a diet which was going to measure my microbiome, and it was going to measure my blood, and it was going to measure my DNA, and it was going to give me this sort of incredibly detailed, personalised diet plan of how I was supposed to eat every single day. And that, I understand that that's where a lot of the science is going, but in many ways that sort of horrifies me because am I going to be only allowed? Is everybody going to only be allowed to eat their own individual diet? Are we going to stop eating together? Are we going to stop sharing food? Are we going to stop cooking for people? I find that. I find that a little bit of a worrying trend, if I'm really honest.
Yeah, that's hard to imagine, actually. If everyone will have their own kind of personalized diet, how are we ever going to be sharing anything?
Yeah, it sounds like quite dystopian idea that we're just all going to lead these very personalized lives and isolated lives. I just think that sounds like not a food future that I would want.
Yeah, but that also makes me think about another aspect of why people might gravitate towards certain diets, because it becomes part of their identity, and they also become part of that tribe, and they feel a part of some sort of community that they might not have in their lives.
Yeah. It's a really interesting point, and it's something I see a lot. I obviously engage a lot on social media with people who are interested in diet and talk about diet a lot, and a lot of them will, almost define themselves by how they eat. So you look at their profiles, and their diet is very much a prominent part of that profile, and often be like, not only what they eat, but more about what they don't eat, what they exclude from their diet. So you'll have vegans, and you'll have carnivores, and you'll have paleo dieters, and you'll have sort of a just eat real food type people, and they will, it's very much part of their identity, and which is fine. I think we traditionally always, food and food exclusion has always played a part in religion, and it's always played a part in sort of social identity for many years, and that. That can be problematic, because it can be, when I challenge someone, and I get sort of attacked for criticising vegans, I get attacked for criticising carnivores and paleo dieters and low carb dieters, and all these people, they all sort of have it in for me, because I sort of challenge their beliefs sometimes, and I think a lot of the time when something is part of defines your identity so much, it can really be quite unsettling for people when you challenge the sort of their beliefs in that way, and say, it's not quite that simple. It's not all about just cutting out this thing, or that's not going to improve health. Really, the evidence doesn't support that. You very much challenge their identity, and people become very resistant to understanding any nuance in these things, because they just believe the stuff which confirms what what they think they know and what is part of their identity. So yeah, it does create a problem. It does create very entrenched groups, in sort of the dietary space. There are people who just will not budge on their beliefs and believe their diet is the perfect diet for all. It's actually a thing that I've taken from religious philosophy, which is this idea of something called the unity of the virtues, where if you think that something is good in one way, you will believe that it's good in all ways, and it comes from religion. But this idea that there's the world is perfectly organised and being organised by God. And what that means is, essentially, if you're someone who is very passionate about a vegan diet, you will be inclined to believe that diet is perfect in every way. So it's perfect for your. If you've seen improvements in your health, you'll believe it's perfect for everybody's health. You'll believe it's perfect for the health of the planet. You'll believe it's perfect for feeding people on low incomes. You will believe that it is something that sort of. It has a unity of virtues. It is perfect for everything, and the same if you believe you're very passionate about a low carb diet, and you've seen it work in you. You will then believe, well, that's bound to work in everybody, and it's bound to be okay for the planet. And even though the evidence says it's very much not, people will convince themselves that eating lots of meat is a good way of protecting the environment, and you will believe that these sort of you'll believe what your belief, your diet, the thing that defines your identity, is perfect in all ways. And the evidence says that's not the case. Unfortunately, life is not that simple. The world is not that organised. Some vegan foods are terrible for the environment. Some vegan diets are good for people's health, but some are really bad for people's health. A lot of eating huge amounts of meat is not great for people on people's health often, and not great for people on low incomes, and not great for the environment. Things are complex and messy, unfortunately, and we don't like that. So people like to believe in stuff that is part of their identity. It's a very, very good point that you outlined. It is very important that we kind of, at least allow ourselves a bit of opportunity to understand there's nuance in the world, which when food really defines your identity, that's kind of a difficult space to persuade people to get into.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, as you said, it becomes like religion, and when you challenge someone's religious beliefs, it's really, really.
Yeah. I remember when I started writing that diet. There's a religious scholar called Alan Levinovitz who's helped me a lot and has written a number of books. He wrote The Gluten Lie and is very, very good commenter on these things. And he said, I said I'm writing about food, and he said, food's the only other thing that even rivals that in terms of how much the sort of complex area that I'm getting into that people are going to argue with me about. Religion is the only thing that comes close. Food and religion, and in some ways, it's kind of food is almost as religion has declined, this food identity has in some areas grown to replace it.
Yeah, like for example, in Russia, where I'm from, government destroyed religion quite some time ago, and I think for me at some point, like when I was a teenager, my diet became like one of the things that defined me, and I was really passionate about at that time about raw vegan diet, and it felt like really essential part of my identity, without which like I couldn't exist.
Yeah, and there are benefits to that. If it gives you an identity and it gives you a community, then that's a good thing. People need communities, and people need identities, and people need sort of things to be passionate about and share and talk about. But I do feel it's become a little bit too important for some people, and also the thing that always worries me and always upsets me is when that slips into the passionate belief that your food choices are good food choices can easily slip into denigrating the choices of others and attacking other people and telling them that they're eating the wrong way and they're doing the wrong thing. Whereas we should just we should relax far more about food. Fine if you want to be vegan. Fine if you want to eat a low carb diet. Fine if you believe that paleo is a good thing. But it's that attacking other people for the way that they're eating, and saying, I hate the way this person's eating. Why are these people do it? And kind of just saying this food is poison or this food is toxic, and making people feel ashamed of what they're eating and making people feel afraid of what they're eating. Where we all just navigate the world in the way that works for us, and we all we should just certainly relax about what other people are eating and stop sort of attacking them and telling people they're doing life wrong. Until you've live someone else's life, you can't tell them what the best way to do it is. And I feel that there's too much of that happens now, and that's kind of the thing that really, really upsets me, because it's a dangerous path. It's a dangerous thing to make people afraid of how they're eating or ashamed of how they're eating. There are some people who really, really struggle with that, and we must be very careful. And I see that in. I have no problem with vegans. I have a sort of there's kind of it's a strange thing actually. I've written about problems with vegan diets in terms of the way people communicate them. I have no problem with it in any other level, but for some reason that's put me on some sort of a list of people. So when a vegan story happens in the media, I get contacted by news organisations and TV companies and stuff, and they always get in touch with me, and then I speak to a researcher. And I think the fact that I think they want me to sort of say, vegan diets are ridiculous, which is not true. You can be perfectly healthy vegan diet. You can be unhealthy as well. Eating a vegan diet, and there are many reasons why we should be eating far, far less meat than we actually do. But they never actually. Because I'm sort of a bit more reasonable than they want me to be to make good television, I don't think I often don't make it onto these TV debates, because I think that's the problem. People just want really they want to see a debate which is very sort of one side against the other, people shouting at each other, rather than appreciating there's nuance.
Yeah, nobody really interested probably in hearing scientific truth.
Yeah, not when it's boring. Which it often is, and I think my latest book actually, it won't be out for a while, but I've just finished writing it. It's about the environmental impact of food, and obviously a lot of that dips into meat and veganism, and what is the best, what does the future of food look like? How are we going to feed 11 billion people sustainably and not completely destroy the planet? And that's a really interesting debate, and I think a lot of people want that to be framed as, should we all go vegan? Because that's kind of the big headline grabbing thing that you see in the newspapers. So and so says we should all eat a vegan diet. I actually don't think that's the case. I think we eat far, far more meat than we currently do. I think a number of people deciding to go vegan is probably a good way to get the population as a whole to eat less meat. But I don't think. I don't actually think from my time, 2.5 years now spent researching and speaking to many of the world's leading experts on the impact, environmental impact of food. I don't think that a completely meat-free planet is one that would be more sustainable. We need one where we eat far less meat, but there are good reasons why some meat within the food system, some animal products within the food system is a good thing. But people don't really want to hear that nuance. They want to hear meat is perfect and we should all eat loads more of it, or they want to hear everyone needs to go vegan. And the nuance and subtlety where the truth lives is something that people don't want to hear sometimes, especially the media, because they want a big story.
Exactly. And, let's just transition to this topic that you are more passionate about these days? Like, why did you decide to switch from diet world to more of like food system world, sustainability, and all related subjects?
The diet world, I kind of, I think you can spend your life arguing with different dietary tribes and not really get anywhere. What I wanted to do was just get some good information out into the public, and I wanted to help people sort of navigate that world a bit easier and write about that. But I didn't want to get into become the sort of person who's just constantly repeating the same argument again and again, because I find that a little bit frustrating. I want to move on to talking about the environmental impact of food, because I feel it is probably the most important issue facing humanity at the moment, and it's one that we're not talking about that much. We're talking a lot about global warming. We're talking a lot about CO2 in the atmosphere, and rightly so. That's incredibly important. But we are missing often the really dramatic and serious problems facing our food system into the future, and that's that we need to feed 10, 11 billion people at some point. We need to create a food system where that's possible. That's going to involve us making more food than has ever been made in the history of the planet, or of humanity. Sorry, there are huge problems. We're running out of agricultural land, and the impact of increasing agricultural land around the world is one of the most destructive forces on the planet. You can talk about global warming, but right now, the thing that is really impacting upon the natural world is the destruction of natural habitats, and that's being driven by agriculture. We are running out of agricultural land. There is no spare agricultural land at the moment. There's no spare land for grazing, and 25% of the planet's surface is used for grazing animals. And every time we decide we're going to eat more meat, which the world is doing, 3% increase in meat consumption every year, partly driven by an expanding population, but also driven by an increasingly wealthy population. The only way of producing more animal produce right now is to expand into tropical forests. And if you look at the figures, if we don't dramatically change the way we eat and consume and produce food, then by 2050 we will have destroyed all of the world's forests. We will have released enough greenhouse emissions from just food production to raise global temperatures by 2 degrees, exceeding the Paris agreements. And that's without any, even if power generation and industry and transport reduce their emissions down to zero, agriculture as it is, without significant change, will cause 2 degrees of global warming. And so it's and also, global warming itself has an impact on agriculture and food production, and will change food production dramatically. We need to see dramatic transformation of our food system. People aren't really talking about it very much. Environmentalists have focused for a long time on emissions, and rightly so, because that's important. But they haven't focused on land use, which is just something that people are not talking about at all. And really desperately needs to be addressed. Mm-hmm. How that's going to be addressed, I think, is one of the biggest challenges facing humanity. We will see that impact dramatically ramp up over the next few years. We're concentrating on single little. Well, I don't want to say little issues, but we're very interested in plastics, and this is a significant issue, and plastic pollution is terrible. But compared to the impact of habitat degradation and food production and the increasing demands on our food systems, that might be considered in 20 years' time. Plastics might be considered a pretty minor point in a food system which is heading the planet towards a disaster if we don't dramatically change it. I'm not saying we are going to have a disaster, because I do believe that we will change it, but only if we really start discussing it seriously and really start demanding that there is significant action by countries and governments and organisations around the world to create widespread systemic change to our food system, because the alternatives of doing nothing and carrying on as we are just not worth thinking about.
And based on all the research that you already done, what are some of your suggestions or thoughts on how we can go about changing the food system? Like, what kind of measures governments can take to improve our food system?
It's a really good point. I think there are many things that can be done, and some of them are well, actually most of them are probably a little bit complex and a little bit boring. There's things like agricultural subsidies, which are paid. The system we have for subsidising agriculture in Europe and around the world is not fit for purpose. It really isn't. It was designed after the Second World War in order to protect agriculture and ensure that there was continued food sovereignty within countries and within Europe, and it created an incredibly unbalanced food system where we subsidised a few globally traded crops, and we end up subsidising a lot of grain and corn and production in order to feed animals. We subsidised animals. We subsidised beef and dairy production hugely, and we subsidise sugar production in Europe, and then worry about the effects of sugar and tax it at source for consumers. We're paying to subsidise production of sugar, and then we're sort of thinking that has a negative health impact, so we're then taxing it at source. It's a ridiculous system. It should be about the agricultural subsidy system, which is £500 billion worldwide every year, so it's an incredibly significant piece of money. And if we could repurpose that completely in order to focus on protecting the environment and improving health, then I think that would make a huge change. I think one of the biggest things that needs to happen is behavioural shifts in the way we eat food. We eat far too much meat, and it's very difficult to get away from that. Whichever way you look at it, 25% of the world's land is used for grazing cattle, and if there is no good food future where that amount of land expands. There's no good food future where we're grazing more cattle around the world. I can't think of any. You look at it in any way possible, and every expert will tell you we eat far too much meat, and that's increasing, not decreasing. So we need to kind of just think about the way we eat and think about. I think we need to. We can still have meat within our diet. We can still have animal products in our diet. We need to celebrate them more, and we need to think about them being far more special and eat them occasionally, and really enjoy them rather than thinking of as everyday staples, things we eat every day or a couple of times a day. Often people will we have this sort of insistence that meat is the thing we have to eat, and that is a cultural thing. It's not a biological thing. You look at countries where the amount of meat, generally speaking, as affluence increases, as countries get richer and populations get richer, they eat more meat, and that's a very consistent thing over almost every country. But in certain countries, particularly in India, that relationship is broken because of cultural differences, because people have a different attitude to meat and eat it in a different way and consume it in a different way and think about it in a different way. And so, our drive to eat huge amounts of meat all the time, every day, is very much a cultural thing. And we need to think about changing that cultural thing. And, looking at other options of things we can eat and things that we can enjoy and embracing them more and finding more pleasure in eating those things. If you're telling people eat less meat, that's a very bad way. In terms of basic marketing, that's just a bad way of doing things. Because if you're saying eat less of this, people are going to feel like they're going without something. Kind of similar to what I said before about restrictive diets, about tell people they can't have something and that's the one thing they're going to want.
Yeah.
So we need to get more plant protein, we need to vegetables and all these things that we should be eating, and whole grain carbohydrates, and create a world where the diet that people desire contains far more of those things and far less of the things which are damaging the environment. And it's going to take a huge cultural shift. It's going to take an enormous amount of insight into how to change people's behaviour. It's going to take an enormous amount of effort. It's going to be very complex. But it is something we absolutely need to do. And for me, it's creating that world, that society, where those diets that are better for the planet, are the ones that people actually desire. And you're not going to get anywhere by making people feel guilty about that they're eating the wrong way. You're going to get somewhere by making people actively want to eat the right way.
Yeah, I mean, this totally makes sense. I'm also curious about your views on food waste. They say, that if we kind of accumulate all the food that we waste, it's gonna occupy like a space compared to a country like China. So I'm not sure how truthful it is, but what's your view on food waste? Did you do any research on that?
Yeah, I mean, food waste is interesting, an interesting topic. I mean, I think there is some uncertainty. The figures are horrific when you look at food waste. There is some uncertainty about how they're collected and how accurate they are. But I really can't. I'm not an expert on that, but some people who are have told me that we need to be far more careful about how we get figures, because it's very difficult to actually know how much food is wasted, because it's often based on short-term survey data, and there's all sorts of problems with that. But generally accepted is that 1/3 of all food produced is wasted in some way, at various points throughout the system. In developed countries, that tends to be with the consumer. Most food waste, people buy food and then they throw away about 1/3 of it, which is an astonishing amount. When you think about the environmental impact of food, 1/3 of that is basically taken up with filling up our bins, which is a pretty horrifying thought. And obviously, if you didn't waste that 1/3 of food, you could address all sorts of things. You could address you could easily address the 800 million people in the world who don't have enough food to eat, and the 2 billion people who have nutrient deficient diets. You could address food insecurity almost everywhere. If you didn't waste all that food, you would dramatically reduce the environmental impact of food if you didn't waste 1/3 of it. But it's very easy to say that. It's very difficult to actually do anything about it, because what are the reasons why so much food is wasted? And often, we have a preconception about why so much food gets wasted, and often those preconceptions are wrong. When you actually look at research into this area, people will say, "Oh, people don't understand food. People don't value food. Food's too cheap. People don't cook in the way they used to when we were young, and people don't have enough knowledge, and we need to teach them to cook better, and we need to teach them to learn some culinary skills." And those sort of things sound good, and they sound like they're very sensible, but actually, and they're sort of things that I would have supported for many years as ways forward. But actually, when you look at the studies into food waste, often those aren't the reasons why people are wasting food. Often the reasons why people waste food are perhaps a little bit deeper and a bit more systemic. So they might be. There's a lot of pressure, certainly in the country where I live. There's a lot of pressure for people to produce fresh food from fresh ingredients every day, and there's a lot of this concept of fresh being better is kind of a very much taken as an organising principle for the world of food. So we must eat more fresh food, more fresh produce, and in some ways there's something in that, but in other ways the word fresh doesn't really mean that much. Often fresh produce is just stuff that's not kept in a refrigerator or not kept frozen, and it may have been sat on the shelf for quite a long time. And often we'll buy stuff in order to make ingredients and cook from fresh ingredients like people are supposed to, and that they think they're supposed to, and is part of this important value in society of cooking from fresh ingredients. But often almost always, in fact, that sort of cooking results in more waste because we buy stuff in the wrong quantities. We don't use all of it. We have stuff left over in the fridge and we don't know how to use that, and we end up throwing a lot of it away, or we cook too much and we don't eat it all and we end up throwing it away. In that scenario, the more people you cook for, generally the more leftovers you have, the more waste you have. So often the things that are causing the waste are the things that are thought of as being good food practices by society. And I'm not saying we should never cook anything from fresh. My whole thing is trying to encourage people to enjoy food and share food and eat together and do all those things. But often, a lot of the organising principles there are the things that actually are causing a lot of the food waste. And we perhaps need to look at those principles underlying the way we eat and the way we consume food, and think about how we can create a better world. And I'm not saying, the line that I often come out with, which people react to, is that whatever you say about the food system, eating food from fresh ingredients sounds like a good thing, but people who eat frozen pizza don't waste food because they just eat the frozen pizza. And I'm not saying that everyone should just eat frozen pizza. I'm not sponsored by a frozen pizza company, but there is something in that. There is a truth in there, which we perhaps need to think about. Perhaps we need to think about moving some of our sort of eating a family meal together every day, cooked from fresh ingredients, is considered to be a absolutely positive, good thing that everyone should be doing, and I think that society should really strive for. But perhaps we need to look what underlies that and think about different ways of organising the way we eat. Perhaps we should think about for a certain number of meals a week, eating them out of in cafeterias or workplaces where food waste can be minimised. Because businesses like retailers, restaurants, caterers, they're very good at minimising waste. Within the home, it's very, very difficult for people. And we're just constantly telling people, oh, you're just terrible people because you're not doing this food thing wrong. People are trying. It's not that people don't care. People are really trying to do the right thing. But there's so many conflicting pressures on people that they're often getting stuff wrong, and food waste is resulting from that. So I think we tend to oversimplify these problems and think we can just teach people better cooking skills and then the food wasting will go away. And that's not necessarily true. I mean, but a lot of the stuff is systemic. It's like how we buy food is problematic. So if you go and buy. If I go into a shop and I've got a recipe I've got to cook and I need a leek to go in it, then I will have to buy a pack of 4. And I'm a chef, but I'm going to struggle to use 4 leeks in the time it takes for them to go off in different recipes. So if we could buy and purchase things in a different way, if we could, frozen vegetables are far better in many instances for cooking, because they can be kept frozen and. You can take a small amount out. It's often we need to sort of unpack the way we're doing things and just think more carefully about how we can organise the way we cook, and also how we can organise the way we buy stuff in order to just minimise that. And it's a lot more complex than just teaching people a few simple rules.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I would like to transition from discussing all these global challenges that we are all facing to more personal level. So what are your personal recommendation, maybe from the way you eat, the way you organize your own food in your household? What are your recommendations to people? How can people improve the way they eat? Maybe eat, healthier for themselves, but also how to eat better for our global food system. What are some maybe behaviors or life hacks or something personally useful?
Oh God, I don't know. I mean, I think the one thing I would want to encourage people to eat more of is I would never want to encourage people to eat less of anything because of the reasons I've discussed. But I think if people to eat more of is pulses and beans and sort of legumes and lentils and things like that, and just encourage people to seek out recipes where those things are, the hero ingredients in recipes, and you can find ones where you can find sort of pleasure in eating that way, because that's the only way you will sustainably make a change, is if you actually enjoy eating the thing that you want to eat, the things that you want to eat more of. I try, like I said, the rules for healthy eating are pretty simple. Eat more fruits and vegetables. So look for some recipes and appealing ways of eating those things that are going to make sense in your life and are going to be better for you and suit the way you or your family live. And some of those, sometimes that might be sort of convenience options. Don't feel you have to be spending hours in the kitchen cooking from everything from fresh. Feel if there's something with more vegetables and pulses and beans and whole grain carbohydrates in, then look for that, and if it's a convenient product, then that's great. If it's a recipe, then that's great. But just try and find pleasure in those things. Look around and find ways of eating those products where you're going to enjoy and are going to make sense for you and be good for you. I always struggle to give people generalised advice about how to live and how to eat and how to cook, because I think everyone's life is dramatically different, and I never want to end up making people feel guilty for not doing things in a certain way. It's about finding pleasure in foods that you want to eat more of, and I think if you don't do that, food should never be a penance. Food should never be something you're forcing yourself to eat because you believe that's the right thing to do. If you don't enjoy eating a certain ingredient you've been told is really good for you, don't stress too much about that. Don't force yourself to eat it, because you're just going to end up with a really problematic relationship with food. Look around for similar things which you might enjoy more, and just try as many different things as possible, and eat as wide and varied and interesting a diet as possible, and make sure that doesn't involve arbitrarily excluding things for no good reason.
Yeah, that sounds like a great advice, but also our listeners are always curious about, like, what do you personally eat on a daily basis? Let's say, I don't know, yesterday, like, what did you eat? How did you make it?
Oh, right, okay. I'm from the UK, so on a Sunday we have a very traditional roast dinner, which is basically a roast chicken I had yesterday, and sort of roast potatoes and a few different vegetables and sort of sauce of it and stuff like that. Really quite simple traditional British cooking is what I love and enjoy. I also, partly from my experience as a chef, which I worked a lot in Italian restaurants, I love Italian food, and I'm sort of very passionate about the real simplicity of Italian food and Italian sauces and making my own pasta and that sort of thing. So that's the sort of thing that I enjoy. I actually enjoy simple foods done really well. I'm always drawn to those sorts of cuisines which do really, really simple cooking, which really let ingredients a small number of ingredients really shine. So I love anything like that. And I meet lots of people from around the world, and I'm always interested in the sort of real sort of dishes that form the heart of their cuisine, and especially the simple things that are cooked in many homes. I'm not so interested in the sort of showy type dishes. I'm interested in understanding what people around the world cook as a staple food in their homes. Because I think actually an interesting point about that is that we often our cuisine tends to focus on the real celebration dishes these days, because societies have become more affluent. Often we're eating the dishes of celebration a lot of the time, the big sort of platters of meat and the big sort of grand dishes. Those have become the norm, and I'm really interested in discovering dishes from around the world which are sort of simple and cooked every day, simple stews and simple sort of casseroles and dumplings and that sort of thing. So yeah, that's what I'm interested in.
Yeah, I mean, me too. I actually, every time I travel, I try to like get into some household where people cook homemade food and see what's cooking there.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's the most interesting thing we can do. And I think you find that people haven't always eaten sort of huge amounts of meat. It's just we do these days because that's that we kind of are having the celebratory food every day, whereas we should be kind of getting back to eating the staple foods because they're often no less delicious than the celebration foods.
I agree. So thank you, Anthony, for this amazing conversation and so many insights into, food as a global thing, but also as a very personal thing. So it was really joyful conversation.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's a pleasure. It's always good to talk and do these things. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, and where can people learn more about you, more about your work? Where would you like people to go to read some of your stuff?
Okay, so I have 2 books, Bad Science and the Truth About Healthy Eating and the Truth About Fat. So that's a good place to start. They're available fairly widely in most European languages, I think. Well, certainly the first one is. And I have a blog which is theangry-chef.com, where you can sort of read. I have been writing a book recently, so I haven't contributed to that for a while. There's a long history of various different blog posts on various different diets, so people can have a look through that. Or they can follow me on Twitter, where I do most of my social media stuff, which is @1_angry_chef.
Fantastic. I'm going to link all of this in the show notes, and so people can easily find you anywhere they like. And thank you for your work. I really enjoy it. And again, it makes me, I think, a better also nutritionist, a better advisor to my clients, because it makes me think, more scientifically, not diet driven. So thank you for your work, and I'm sure a lot of listeners will get a lot of useful information from today's conversation that make them think a little bit deeper about their food.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.